This week on the Wheelhouse. The college debt crisis. How student loan borrowers are paying the price. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that brings the politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. Student loans are once again the center of a major political fight in Washington. Over the last few weeks, millions of borrowers have been navigating a new set of rules, from changes in repayment plans and limits on how much some students can borrow to uncertainty around loan forgiveness programs. The Trump administration says changes will rein in what it sees as an unsustainable student debt system and encourage colleges to bring down costs. But students and their families are feeling a lot of uncertainty right now, confusion and frustration too. To help us understand what's actually changing and what borrowers need to know right now, I'm joined by Ayelet Sheffi. She covers student loans and higher education policy for Business Insider. Ayelet, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Questions on anything that we're going to talk about today? You want to talk about federal student loans? Any kind of questions you have about yours? Hit us up, comment on our YouTube live stream, or give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Ayelet, let's start with the big picture. A number of changes to the federal student loan system took effect July 1st. For listeners who have not been following every twist and turn, what are the major changes that borrowers need to know about?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole host of changes that borrowers are navigating right now, and it's a result of the Trump administration's big, beautiful spending legislation that took effect July 1st. So we can start with the new income-driven repayment plans. So the Trump administration introduced two new repayment plans. One is the new repayment assistance plan. This is intended to be the more affordable option for borrowers, serving as an income-driven repayment plan. But as borrowers are finding out, it's less generous than the ones that they had prior. They're seeing their payments go up on this plan. And then we have the new tiered repayment plan. It's a standard repayment plan, and it is the more expensive option for borrowers. We're also seeing the introduction of some new borrowing caps. So we saw which took effect July 1st, a $100,000 lifetime borrowing cap for graduate students, $200,000 borrowing cap for professional students. And this is something that has been controversial just due to how the administration is defining a professional degree.
Yes.
This is something that has been, embroiled in litigation. It's still in progress. But borrowers who previously qualified for the higher borrowing cap as a professional student could stand to lose that limit as the litigation plays out. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now as well is just the elimination of the SAVE plan. This was a Biden era plan. It gave borrowers a lot cheaper payments, a shorter timeline to debt relief, and borrowers are now required to transition onto new plans within a 90-day time frame that they are given.
But generally, more options available to those folks who at least had loans, although they are losing the program, than there might be for new borrowers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. So borrowers who were previously making payments on their prior plan, they will not have to immediately get off that plan. The idea is to phase them out. So borrowers who are paying can probably keep the terms that they had. They don't have to get kicked off immediately and make those higher payments. These new limits primarily as of now apply to borrowers who have never taken out a loan before, and now they are entering the system.
You talked about professional degrees earlier. We did a whole show on that earlier in the year. Listen, folks, back to our archive at ctpublic.org/wheelhouse. Really interesting stuff there. Really interesting when you talk to us about the IDRs, that income-driven repayment plan. That sounds rather intriguing, too, at least in terms of the rhetoric that you have, not that you're using, but that is used to actually say what the plan is. The IDR, the name of it is what I'm trying to say. Ayelet, though, you mentioned the introduction of a new repayment plan called the Repayment Assistance Plan. How does this plan work, And how does it different from the income-driven repayment plans many borrowers are familiar with? I guess the more realistic income-driven real payment plans that people are used to.
hmm Absolutely. So there are a few differences here with the new repayment assistance plan. So what borrowers will find is that they will receive, the minimum payment that you can get on this plan would be $10. And it will set a borrower's monthly payment at 1 to 10% of their discretionary income. The plan also will waive a borrower's unpaid interest, which is a facet that the administration has been touting as a reason that this is, beneficial for borrowers. They won't have to deal with that spiraling interest if they are making their payments. I think one of the biggest key difference here that borrowers might notice is that this plan will forgive a borrower's loan after 30 years of payments. That's a lot different from, the prior income-driven repayment plans that allowed for relief after 20 or 25 years, depending on when you first entered repayment. So borrowers will likely start to notice it is less generous. They'll likely be paying for longer and at higher payment amounts.
Also heard a lot about confusion among borrowers. I mean, you'll hear later in the show, we got some sound that we're going to play back later and talk to folks about this. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of people not understanding. Obviously, it does involve finance as well, which is always tricky, particularly for me. People struggling to figure out what plan they're in, what their payments will be, even having trouble reaching their loan service providers. What's causing so much of the disruption right now, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're hearing a whole bunch of confusion and challenges as borrowers are navigating this. I think we can point to a few things. The biggest one likely being staffing cuts at the education department. We're seeing that the federal student aid office isn't as staffed up as it once was. And it's more difficult to, navigate these questions from borrowers that are coming in. The same thing, borrowers are reporting they're just having challenges reaching their servicer in the first place. Some are spending hours on hold, not able to sometimes even reach the customer service representative. And that can make it really difficult when borrowers are trying to figure out, what is going on? What do I have to do? When is my payment due? That's really contributing to the confusion and stress that we're seeing from borrowers as they're working through these changes.
I guess we'll talk a little bit about the professional programs as well again here, and I guess graduate students as well, because we do want to know about those new limits, because that's a big change here as well. And some of the reporting that NPR has done, sort of our parent network here, at least in terms of affiliation here. Why did the Trump administration make that change, and who is most affected? Is it these grad students? Is it people with professional degree programs?
hmm Yeah, absolutely. So the Trump administration initially proposed narrowing who would qualify for the professional limit to just 11 programs. That included programs like law, dentistry, medicine, but it excluded programs that might have previously qualified for the higher borrowing limit, including advanced nursing and social work. And those were programs that immediately we had advocates, lawmakers across the aisle saying that these are programs that need that higher limit. Their tuition can be higher than, the 100,000 cap for the graduate borrowing. And it's something that, could exacerbate the ongoing healthcare shortage if these students cannot get the money they need to borrow. And then we have, the Trump administration has said that this is just, it's something, it's not defining whether a student is professional or not. It's just simply a definition. But of course, it's something that we're seeing play out in litigation as well.
Critics say these limits could push some students towards private loans. What's that landscape like right now for folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. Private lending has been historically riskier. There's less oversight over private lending than there is federal. Interest rates can be higher. It can just be harder for students to understand their rights, their options when they're in the private lending sphere. But as you said, with these borrowing caps, there is a concern that students might be driven toward, more riskier loan products, which could include some private lending products, just to supplement that federal funding gap. So it's something that even private lenders themselves have said they're anticipating an influx of federal borrowers.
Is there a sticker shock there, or like incorrect payment estimates at least, or is it more in everywhere they're kind of getting it? Can you tell us about
Yeah,
some of
I
the
think
reporting you've done there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with private lending, it's difficult to say because it varies so much. Every lender has its own terms, their own interest rates. It can vary based on the borrower's financial situation. But I think borrowers are finding just across the board that payments are high, and whether they might be able to find a better rate or a better payment amount in private lending really does vary from borrower to borrower and company to company.
When we talk about student loan forgiveness here and talking about some of these public programs, if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, the program allows some borrowers to have their loans forgiven after 10 years of qualifying payments. This typically applies to people who work for the government or nonprofits. You had that. There was always deferred kind of payment programs. Where do these programs stand right now? Do they still
Mhm.
exist?
So public service loan forgiveness is still there. It's still existing. Borrowers are continuing to make payments toward forgiveness in PSLF. Where we saw challenges earlier is the Trump administration had proposed limiting eligibility for certain employers if they did not, align with the administration's belief of what public service is. They had intended to roll that out on July 1st, but a lawsuit blocked that from taking effect. So as of now, public service loan forgiveness remains as is. It is something to watch though, because the administration has said it's continuing to evaluate the program, see where it could refine who qualifies for the program. So it's definitely something to follow. And I think just more generally, we're seeing backlogs just with processing forgiveness across programs. The administration is working through that on their timeline, and borrowers are continuing to get relief through various programs, but it is delayed.
Can we go back to the Biden administration safe plan real quick? It designed to reduce student debt burden and even offered loan forgiveness in certain cases. Safe plan struck down by a federal court. What happens to people who were enrolled in that plan now?
Mhm. So right now, borrowers are in the process who are on save. They're receiving notices from their servicer, giving them a 90-day time frame to switch to a new existing plan. And these notices are coming in waves. They began going out on July 1st. So some borrowers have gotten that time frame, others are still waiting. And servicers say they expect to complete sending out those notices by the end of 2026. So once a borrower gets that notice, they can either choose to apply for a new plan, find a new plan. If they do not select a new plan within their specified time frame, they will be automatically placed in a standard plan. So that is the most expensive repayment plan. They will likely face higher payments. So the education department is encouraging SAVE borrowers once they get that notice or even before then to just get off the plan.
We're hearing a lot about these changes from the perspective of people who already have student debt, but there are also people who are about to take out loans for college or graduate school. Ayala, what should prospective borrowers be thinking about before they take on new federal debt under these rules?
hmm I think they should absolutely talk to, at the first step should be just look at what the plans are, look at what your options are. If you think you can avoid student loans, if you think that there is an option that can help you, not take out the maximum amount, that's absolutely, something to consider. I think that, borrowers should also just be aware that, when you are entering an agreement, when you are looking to finance your education with student loans, it's something that you will have to pay off once you graduate college. It's not something that you can try to defer. You can enter forbearance, but it is something that will likely not go away, especially with the Trump administration's focus on repayment. So definitely understanding your options, understanding the implications of having student debt is really vital when you're entering that agreement.
Stepping back from the borrower's perspective now, and again, I told you that we did some people on the street interviews in advance of the show, and anecdotally, I can say that part of what might be adding to the confusion, or at least my understanding of the situation, is that when you ask people about whether or not they have student loans, some folks are more focused on the people that are getting student loans, or at least injecting rhetoric that they've heard from the administration about it. So I wonder if this becoming sort of a political football is confusing the issue. Maybe it's making more of a divide. I think that both parties can agree that college affordability is a problem, but they might have different ideas about how to address it. How would you describe the fundamental disagreement between the two sides, if we're at least looking at the two major parties in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think obviously, as we've seen for years, this has been a quite a partisan issue just in terms of how to go about student debt, student loan forgiveness. I think what we're seeing is that there is bipartisan agreement that college costs are too high. Some students might be borrowing excessively. That is a problem. But what we're seeing here is that there's a split in how to address that. You know, the Trump administration has been extremely focused on repayment. They want borrowers back in repayment. They want them figuring out the best way to make their payments as soon as possible. Whereas on the Democratic side, we're seeing, more of a push to lay off on repayment as the administration and borrowers are working through the complexities, the challenges, the errors that are in the student loan system. And they're pushing for relief for, sometimes even a pause on payments as these issues are sorted out. So, there is that agreement that costs are too high, students are struggling, they're borrowing too much, but we're seeing that partisan split when it comes to the solution.
We had the rent is too damn high party in the 2010s. Maybe we'll have the interest rate is too damn high party in the 2020s. Hey, I guess if that exists, it would be Ayelet Sheffy, who is the reporter that would be following this. Thank you so much for your work and telling us about some of the work that you're doing at Business Insider, covering education, student loans, and the federal workforce. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ayelet. After the break, we're going to get a little more personal. We'll talk about what all of these changes actually mean for people who are struggling to pay their student loans and where Connecticut borrowers can turn for help. Do you think students are taking on too much debt? Hit us up. Comment on our YouTube live stream or give us a call, 888-720-9677. You're listening to The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We've been talking about major policy changes happening around student loans, but for many borrowers, the biggest question is more personal. What does this actually mean for me? What if I can't afford my monthly payments? What if I'm confused about my options? Joining us now is Betsy Mayotte, the president and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, a nonprofit that provides free student loan advice and advocacy for borrowers. Betsy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you over there on Zoom. And in studio, we have Michelle Jarvis-Letman, who is Connecticut's inaugural student loan ombudsperson. Michelle, so good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Questions on what you're hearing so far about student loans. Maybe you want to talk to us about yours. You can help us illuminate the situation. It is a pretty darn confusing one. So hit us up, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Before we get into the challenges borrowers are facing right now, tell us about TISLA and why you created this organization, Betsy. What gap did you see that made you think borrowers needed this kind of help?
Yeah, so I've been working in the student loan industry since the earth cooled, over 25 years. Spent most of my career in a compliance and advocacy position. And with my work, I realized that borrowers were looking for a neutral third party, someone who had no association with their loans, that they could get advice from. And my personal opinion is student loan advice should always be free. I was trying to create a space where it would help people avoid the student loan scams that are out there, quite frankly.
Wow. That is tough words. Can you explain more why it's a scam for us here, or help us understand why it is? I think Ayelet also told us a little bit about that, but just go into it, what people face.
Well, unfortunately, anytime there's a lot of money at stake, scammers are going to pop up.
Yes.
And the student loan industry is no exception. So we see these organizations, the Federal Trade Commission is constantly trying to take them down and have successfully, that say, listen, you pay us $3,000 and we'll get your loans forgiven. And at best, they do nothing with the loans. At worst, they end up making the borrowers default on their loans, and they're out, and then they fly away. It's terrible. They victimize people that are already struggling financially with their loans.
That is very hard to hear. Michelle, what are some red flags then people should watch out for when someone is offering help with their loans? Like, what's one way to protect yourself from a scammer then in that regard, Betsy?
Well, in the first place, you should never have to pay for help with your student loans. There's all kinds of free resources out there. There's Tisla, shameless plug. There's Michelle, who's awesome sauce. And, your loan servicer, the Department of Education, all places for free advice. But one of the first red flags is if they promise forgiveness right out of the gate. A second red flag is if they ask for any of your passwords. It's actually illegal for them to ask for your student aid password, but the scammers will do it. So those are the biggest things to watch out for.
Tell us about the work you do as a student loan ombudsperson for Connecticut. We can also call you ombuds. I feel cool now. I feel initiated now if I call you that. The inaugural one, Michelle.
Yes.
Congratulations there. Are there overlaps in the work that you do and that Betsy does?
There is. We try to work with the borrowers one-on-one. Every situation is completely different. We talk about student loans, but every situation is personal. The debt is different. The family income is different. The family makeup is different. So we try to go one-on-one with borrowers to make sure that they are understanding what their options are.
One-on-one with borrowers. How many borrowers? How many might you see?
I can see or speak to anywhere from 15 to 20 a day. At 15 or 30-minute blocks. I take this work very seriously. I don't want anybody to feel rushed or pressured. I've come across people who have $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 of debt. That's not a 5-minute conversation. That's how are we going to try to make this work? So it's something that we implemented this year that we started. We've seen probably close to 200 people already as an office of one. I say we, but it's just me. About 200 borrowers that we've worked with for their student loans.
A lot of people coming in under your umbrella. And I want to almost call you Dr. Jarvis Letman because you're seeing so many people here. But you can help with both federal and private loans, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can. Yes.
And someone can come to you even if they went to school outside of Connecticut?
Yes, as long as they're residing in Connecticut, we will help them for sure.
You're like, don't give me more work.
No, give me all the work.
That is really touching that you are willing to do that. I appreciate that. You've worked in financial aid for about 15 years, from customer service all the way up to directing and consulting. So you're also a first-generation college student yourself.
Yes, I am.
All right, I am too. I love that. How does your own experience shape the way you approach this job?
I think it gives me an extra layer of empathy. I can completely understand how, as a student, you just so desperately wanted to go to college and would sign anything to be able to go, and wanting to do the right thing and trying to make sure that you are repaying it. I don't think people are trying to get out of repaying their loans. They want to, but just not understanding the student loan landscape. So I had federal and private loans. As a first-gen student, I did receive public service loan forgiveness just 3 years ago. I graduated in 2015 with my master's, so it does take a long time for things to happen, but I was making my payments. So I think being able to relate to the borrower as a student and now also as a parent really goes a long way, and people can relax and have a sense of that this work that we're trying to do is genuine and really trying to help people.
Really want to hear from folks. I want to hear your experiences. So please give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. You can also leave a comment on our live YouTube stream. That's at youtube.com/Connecticut Public. We'll check it out and try to get it on the air. Betsy, you said that the last several years have been some of the most chaotic in student loan history. From your perspective, why is that? What are the biggest challenges borrowers are coming to you with right now?
So, the past 4 or 5 years, we've experienced a lot of has never happened before. It started with the COVID pause. Something like where all borrowers were not required to make payments and weren't accruing interest. It's never happened before, never mind for 3 years. And then as they were transitioning back into repayment, there was a call for broad student loan forgiveness. That's never happened before. And then that got shot down by the courts. And then, as you were talking about with the earlier guest, a new payment plan was introduced that was challenged in court. That's never happened before. And all of those things have sort of come together to sort of create the perfect storm of struggles and confusion for borrowers. And because of that, we're seeing, first of all, we're seeing the highest default rate that I've ever seen in my career. The data I've seen last, there were 9.5 million people in default. About 1 in 5 Connecticut borrowers are currently in default of their loans. And that's going to keep rising because of the SAVE plan going away that, again, you talked about with your prior guest. We've got 7 million people that have been in SAVE limbo for the past 2 years. And a lot of those borrowers can't afford whatever payment plans are left available to them, even with the new WRAP plan. So that's sort of, all those things have sort of come together, along with, it's at the same time, healthcare prices have gone up, gas prices have gone up. I just read that produce has gone up like 44% in the last 3 months. And all these things at the same time are really hitting our low and middle class families.
Really great perspective to hear from Betsy there. I turn to you, Michelle, because you're hearing about COVID, then you're hearing about a repayment plan being both introduced and then struck down. So she's saying she's hearing a lot about has never happened before. What is some of the perspective you could share? What are the biggest problems people are bringing to your office?
I think they just don't know what's real at this point because so many changes have happened. I mean, looking at, especially when you start from the COVID pause, there's some people that have never actually were required to make a payment yet because of all these pauses and changes and litigations. So there's some borrowers that have no clue where they're supposed to go. Their servicer has changed. The interest is accruing significantly while they've been in pauses. So the confusion is there. They don't know what's real anymore. They don't know what they're supposed to do at this point. There's different, notices coming out from servicers. There's incorrect information coming out from servicers too, that they're supposed to change their payment plan, but then nope, they don't have to. When they log in, the dates, things aren't aligning together. So the systems aren't working together. So there's chaos and confusion for borrowers, and all they're trying to do is figure out what exactly they're supposed to do.
Betsy, you're saying that 9 million people, something like that, 1 in 5 Connecticut borrowers in default?
That's right.
And if they're already kind of delinquent, or you go ahead, sorry. And then give us options after that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So not only are there 1 in 5 Connecticut borrowers are already in default, for recent grads, if you look at the data against the specific individual schools, of the 52 schools that I looked at in Connecticut, 27 of them, 30% or more of their recent grads are 90 days or more past due, so headed to default.
Wow. And what options do you give those students, maybe even those schools, to try to deal with trying to catch these students before they leave and try to figure something out?
In my experience, the best thing you can do for student loan borrowers is give them the opportunity to educate themselves, to know what options are available. As Michelle mentioned, a lot of borrowers just don't know what they don't know. And a school is in a great position as a trusted communication source to make sure that their students and alumni know what lower payment options are available, or deferments or forbearances. For those already in default, thankfully in the federal student loan program, there's ways out of it. There's a program called loan rehabilitation. They can also consolidate out of default and get the loan back in good standing.
Yeah, tell me, guys. I mean, are people just like, hey, I might as well go into forbearance at this point? Like, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I don't know. Like, tell me about that. Like, what's the biggest mistake? Is that a mistake that people make, or should they do that? Like, what do you say? People are overwhelmed here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a mistake necessarily, because even making a partial payment doesn't count as fulfilling the payment. So if you can't afford to make the payment, you're still going to end up being delinquent on that and then potentially go into default. So if forbearance is the option for you right now, while you maybe try to figure out how this payment structure is going to work, if you need a little more time, forbearance might be the answer for people. It's not the answer for everybody, but ignoring it and not making a payment at all is definitely not the answer. Only making a partial payment isn't going to help either. So forbearance it might have to be that.
What a tough situation. And I would imagine that the administration, for what they're saying about taxpayers and things like that, I would imagine that they wouldn't look too kindly on folks that are unable to make their payments, even though they're unable to make their payments. Another issue we're watching is whether more families may turn to private loans as federal borrowing limits change. I talked to ILED about that. What should families understand about the difference between federal and private loans before taking on that debt?
I think federal loans, even in the state that they're in right now, do have more safeguards than private loans. Every private lender is different. They have their own rules. They have their own repayment structure, whereas federal loans, if you have a federal loan, these are your options. So you really have to look at the borrowing amount, the repayment structure, the interest rate, and what's going to make sense for you for each of them. Private, they don't care. They want their money. There's not usually a lot of forbearances or deferments. They're coming for you for terms of repayment. Whereas again, federally, you have some of those other options. So you really have to look at if it's worth it. The other thing, not everybody can get approved for a private loan that is based on your credit, whereas federal loans are not based on your credit.
Betsy, is there a point where you're just like, this is too much debt for you to take on? And what's that conversation like? How do you prep folks for that?
I say it all the time. Hopefully they're reaching out to me before they've actually started at the institution or maybe a year in. And what I try to do with families like that is get them to understand the return on investment and the affordability of the debt they're taking on. So, for example, if someone comes to me saying, I need a $50,000 private loan for the first year of my child's undergraduate school, I tell them to pump the brakes. And I point out to them, if they're borrowing $50,000 for the first year, they're probably looking at a total of over $200,000 in private loans. And then I extrapolate what that's going to look like for a monthly payment that they'll have to make every single month. Are you going to be able to afford a $2,500 payment every single month for at least 10 years? And then I make suggestions about attending a lower price school like a community college and transferring into the dream school maybe 2 years in to reduce the debt.
So let's go there because that's what I was going to ask you about next. Certain students who qualify also could get their tuition covered. I mean, I've tried to talk about students this way. I mean, help us understand maybe the allure of a community college.
I think
so. Go ahead, Michelle. You start.
I was going to say,
your state. You start.
Being in Connecticut, we're fortunate to have free community college now, especially for high school students coming out of it. So there needs to be a bigger conversation, in my opinion, on utilizing our community college. We have great community college. We have great state colleges and universities as well. And there's just always this, kind of like feeling like, oh, community college. But you have an 18-year-old who doesn't necessarily know what they're trying to do yet.
Is it all free, though, or some programs do some... I know that at community college, too, the cool thing about it is that you could access programs, professional programs that you might not be able to access somewhere else and sort of do like town stuff through the community college. Do those programs cost money? Like, is everything free at
I don't think everything
college?
Is free. Like
Sure.
the general, like your general studies and things, you're getting your gen eds kind of out of the way.
Sure.
So, you can transfer into that, either that dream school or the 4-year school. So taking that into consideration. But even like, as Betsy said, is it worth taking out all that debt? Again, when you have that option, if you know you want to be a teacher, this is the example I use for when I'm talking to people who are thinking about going to college. Think about being a teacher. First of all, I'm biased. You should probably stay in Connecticut because we have great programs, but go to that community college, get those gen eds out of the way, figure out what kind of teaching you maybe want to get into, and then transfer into Western and Central and Eastern. And then we want people to stay here. We want our young folks, I can say young folks now, right? Yeah. To stay in Connecticut, be a part of our state and our community for the long haul. So we need to make sure we're keeping it affordable for them when it comes to college.
I spent a lot of my childhood laughing and chiding folks that wanted to go to community college, Northwestern Community College in Winsted, Connecticut, which is right next to Torrington. And guess where Frankie Graziano ended up? At Northwestern Community College for a year, and then went to UConn Torrington, and then was able to afford UConn through the grace of God by Pell Grants. But not everybody is able to access those things. But there are options, folks. You just got to consult the professionals like Betsy and Michelle, who we will continue to talk to for the rest of today's show. But we first got to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we're going to step back for the immediate crisis and ask a bigger question. Why has student debt become such a defining problem in the first place? And what would it actually take to change all that? What role should the federal government play in student debt? Hit us up. Comment on our YouTube live stream or give us a call, 888-720-9677. You're listening to The Wheelhouse on Connecticut Public. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We've been talking about what's changing in the student loan system and what borrowers can do to navigate the changes. But why has it become so difficult and so expensive to pay for higher education in the first place? And what should the government, colleges, and borrowers themselves be responsible for when it comes to the cost of that education? 888-720-9677. Be quick if you're going to call us because we want to get it on the air. We want to hear about your experiences. And maybe Michelle and Betsy can actually help because they see maybe too many people a day as they're trying to help them or talk to. You've described yourself, Michelle, as someone who really believes education shouldn't become a financial burden. And obviously people shouldn't have to pay for the help to get it, to understand. So what do you hope people take away from working with your office when they come and see you?
You know, I hope they realize they're not alone in this. They have an advocate to help them navigate through this process. And no question is a dumb question, again, because everybody's situation is different. But also just realizing that, you know, the clock is ticking, decisions do have to be made. But they can make more than one appointment with us as well. So as their situation changes, they can come back and see me 5, 10, 20 times if they need to. They should come and reach out to us as much as they possibly can with any type of question and reach out and make sure that they have all the information they need to make the best decision that they can for themselves financially.
Hey, there's people standing by ready to take your call. Where should they call? Where should they email? What's a good place for them to go to?
Yep. So our email is studentloanomsbud@ct.gov, or they can call 860-710-1014. And we can figure out how to make an appointment by that point as well. But, you know, calling is probably the best. Leaving a message, sending an email, visiting our web pages. Right now, we're in a little bit of an influx, transitioning from one office to another. So if you Google search, you know, CT, student loan ombudsman person, we will pop up and you can find our pages there as well.
And we also linked it to our page as well. So
Awesome.
if people click on Michelle Jarvis Letman, they'll get right to that page on the Wheelhouse website. Betsy, the Institute for Student Loan Advisors, how can people reach out to you all?
So if you go to our website, which is freestudentloanadvice.org, we do all our counseling, one-on-one counseling via email. So we're working with between 100 and 200 borrowers a day via email. And so if they need to reach out to us, if they go to our contact us page, they'll see instructions on how to reach out to us via email. And we answer 95% of our emails within a business day.
In the last segment, you told us that there's a lot of has never happened before when you talk to folks. So there's this larger debate happening about why student debt is becoming this issue and why people are seeing some unprecedented things. From your years of working in this field, what do you see as the root problem?
I love this question.
Yeah, let's get it.
So listen, in my my whole career, I've watched Congress tinker with the student debt issue. The problem is the student loans aren't the problem. The problem is the cost of higher education. And what has led to, and there's, you know, people have different opinions as to why the cost of higher ed has gone up so much over the last 20, 25 years. Excuse me. In my opinion, most of the fault lies with the fact that most states, or all states, I should say, over the years have removed money for higher ed from the budget. which has caused the cost of state schools to go up. Now, if you consider that state schools, from an economic perspective or a competitive perspective, are your so-called anchor price schools, here in Massachusetts, UMass, I think, is like $27,000 a year. Well, that makes a private nonprofit who's charging $60 or $70 a year, that passes the laugh test. If we get the state school back down to $8 or $10 grand a year, the $70,000 or $80,000 school no longer passes the laugh test. The other thing is schools don't have any skin to speak of. Schools don't have real skin in the student loan debt game. And that also needs to change, I think, for us to solve this in the long term.
I actually got to talk with somebody who had a graduate degree about federal student loans. I visited Milford with interns Katie Service and Amanda Adams. On the shores of the Sound, I met Kyle Throssell. He's a computer and data scientist from your neck of the woods there in Massachusetts. He was vacationing in Connecticut. I asked Throssell what he thought about subsidized loans, maybe the federal government trying to pay for some of this stuff.
There are majors or programs which serve like a bigger social need, and that we certainly would want to motivate people to go into those fields. And I could see subsidizing or paying off those loans would be a good way to motivate that. I can see that there are ways certainly that paying off loans would in general be beneficial for the social fabric.
Betsy, would that help the issue? Michelle, do you have a reaction to that? What do you guys think?
Go, Michelle. I'll follow you.
I'm like, I'm fairly confident they're trying to go in the opposite direction and, produce unsubsidized.
As we've talked about for most
loans.
of the show, yes.
They want to unsubsidize loans. Graduate loans at one point were subsidized before I went to grad school. But
or deferred at the very least.
Or deferred, right, because that interest is just not accruing right out of the gate. So, I think subsidizing loans is helpful, right? Especially while they're in school, like not accruing that interest right out of the gate, and maybe not having such a higher interest rate either could be beneficial to borrowers and maybe motivate some people to want to, take on some of these programs. But I'm not quite sure that's going to work.
Yeah, go ahead, Betsy.
I think they're going to have to. If you think about the teachers, nurses, social workers, public defenders, what all of those careers have in common is that you need a degree beyond an undergraduate degree in order to practice in that field. And that's where you tend to really rack up the debt. But then the other thing those careers have in common is they tend not to pay very well. So, public service loan forgiveness was created for that scenario in particular, to make sure that people could afford the debt that they would be required to take on to practice in these much, much needed fields. Now with the new loan limits, these people are going to be forced to go to the private sector where no lower payment options exist or very few, and there isn't such forgiveness programs. So they're not going to be able to afford to work in these fields. And we're going to, I predict we're going to end up with a lack of people performing these much needed functions because of that.
Not you ladies, but this conversation has been like that snowblower that you're trying to turn on and prime and get to full throttle. And now we're getting into the teeth of it here. And now we're into it. This is what I wanted to talk about. There's paying the loans. There's paying interest on the loans too. While in Milford, Amanda, Katie, and I were walking up and down Naugatuck Avenue. This is near Walnut Beach. We met Cynthia Hempel. She's actually having her own affordability crisis. She had a resume in hand trying to get a new job, but she talked with us not about her situation, but something her niece was experiencing.
The problem is now, by the time you end up paying off your loans, you've been working for upwards of 10 to 15 years. How do you ever get out of debt? When the interest rate is higher than what you're actually paying for that, there's no way that you can actually get out and crawl out of the hole. Even with programs that they say that are helping them, I haven't really seen it. My niece, for instance, she's a teacher in Milford. She's still paying off her loans, and she's been working for upwards of 4 years now. You got to understand that she's paying every month, but even the monthly payment is not going to dig you out of that hole with the interest.
Betsy, for someone like Cynthia's niece or anybody listening right now who's just feeling overwhelmed by these student loans, they don't know where to start. They don't know if they're in the right repayment plan, or they're worried about falling behind or falling into forbearance. What is the first step you would recommend?
I would recommend that they go to studentaid.gov and use the tools there, the calculators, and read up on things like teacher loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness, and get an idea if they're following the rules and they're on the right plan. And then if they still have questions, they should either call Michelle or email me.
You have any advice in that regard too, Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with that. And, for borrowers who did attend and graduate institutions from Connecticut, there is a student loan reimbursement program that the state offers that I don't think a lot of borrowers are aware of. And you can be reimbursed up to $5,000 a year for 4 years, so a total of $20,000 as you meet certain criteria. There's an income threshold, a community service component, but there is also that option as well. As you're paying off these loans, there might be a little bit of relief at the other end of that from the state.
I think we're going to try to finish up with this question that we're getting from a caller, and we'll have Michelle and Betsy take it after you ask it. Go ahead. You're on with the Wheelhouse, and if you can, please be brief here as we're trying to finish up. Are you on the phone there, Dr. Hines? Can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I am. I didn't hear my name. Sorry. So thank you so much. My question is, I'm president of Hartford Promise, so I have about 1,000 current students or recent graduates from Hartford who are in college and dealing with these questions. Is there a way to reach a larger group of students? I love the work you're doing and the one-on-one. The trust issue, hugely important. But do you all have a way, or would you be willing to do anything on a virtual platform for a larger group so we could get the message out more?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hines. Can you reach out to Dr. Hines? What do you all think? How can you help?
I certainly can. I will. Currently, we do webinars as well, but I do perform on larger platforms for organizations, any type of school. So I will certainly reach out to Dr. Hines because I'm more than willing to do that.
Wonderful. I just got to ask one more question here, and I'm going to try to do this. There's the emotional side of this job, because there aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are people that you're meeting every day, and you said they're in $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 of debt. Tell me how you feel talking to people, and then why these people shouldn't be too embarrassed or ashamed of what they're going through.
That is a great question because, last night I actually talked to a borrower. She's like, I'm afraid to tell you how much I have in debt. And I'm like, try me. It's okay. I've heard it. She said $135,000. I was like, you're not the highest I've heard this week, and it's only Tuesday. So, being in this profession for so long, you see and hear a lot of things. So I don't think people should be embarrassed. It can be draining. For me, personally, it's hard, especially when you don't have necessarily an answer for these people or a good answer to help them try to get out of this debt. Because again, if these people are calling, they are actually trying to pay their debt. So, the big thing is don't be ashamed. I'm not going to spew off and go run and, yell in my neighborhood what's happening or anything like that. But, just come and talk to me and, we'll try to make it work.
We've been talking about the student loan system with Betsy Mayotte, president and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, and Michelle Jarvis-Letman, Connecticut's inaugural student loan ombudsperson. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn. It was spectacular. Thank you so much, Chloe. Edited by Eric Austin. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special thanks to Tess Terrible, our talk show visuals and operations team here at Connecticut Public. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.